Hello, listeners. Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator. I'm all about capturing and curating career and life stories as a meaningful way to celebrate a milestone moment like a big O birthday, anniversary, retirement, or graduation. And I'm at my best when curating photo books that move your memories from the basement or your phone or your computer to the coffee table, giving you and your family and friends access to these treasured memories for years to come. I also love curating and capturing life and career stories through this podcast series, How Did I Get Here? It's a series of interviews designed for people just starting out in their careers, people in transition, or possibly feeling stuck, and giving them access to the stories of people who have been there, done that, so that they might be inspired with some new ideas, or maybe just comforted knowing they're not alone, that everybody starts somewhere and everybody goes through times of transition and times when they feel stuck. Today, I am very excited to be interviewing Carlene Thissen, who is a singer, songwriter, and author. Welcome, Carlene.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
And Carlene's assistant found me through, I guess, all of the podcasts out in the world and asked if I would be interested in interviewing her. And I always love interviewing people outside the normal business community because I typically do a lot of various leaders, et cetera, et cetera. So to have a singer and a songwriter and an author, I'm very excited to hear your story today.
Good, thank you. Yeah, creatives are really
The
fun.
creative.
I call myself that now.
Well, I put myself in that category too. I stepped out of business. Now I'm on the creative side. So we're going to pause for a moment to hear from a very happy Life Story Curator client.
I'm a client of Life Story Curator, and I reached out to Kathy to do my husband's 50th birthday book. And I chose to use Kathy because I've seen her work, and of course I've known her for a long time, and I knew that the product would be way above standard. I've done books myself, and I knew that she would do an exemplary job. The process working with Kathy is very organized, and we started off with interviewing me, coming up with a deeper analysis of who my husband is. And through that process, we came up with things I would never thought of on my own with just her asking certain questions. It triggered memories and special things that really added a great deal of value when we went to put the book together. And I hadn't remembered all these things when I first talked to her about it. So having that interview was great. When my husband opened the book on his birthday, he was nervous, of course, at first, and then very excited and quite emotional. That he's from New Zealand, and so having family represented from so far away in this book was really, really special. And I know that family and friends from afar were pleased to be able to be part of this process. And I couldn't have done, half the job that Kathy did, particularly in the time frame. And it was just beautifully presented. And she captured him very well. And she helped me sort of narrow down the focus and the amount of photos. And it couldn't have been any better.
Okay, so Carlene, tell us, we like to start with the icebreaker questions. So tell us, if you would, where you grew up in the country or the world, and where you are in birth order in your family, and how you think those two things shaped you.
Okay, I grew up in Northwest New Jersey in an area called Sussex County, and people will recognize, I went to Sparta High School, hung out in Lake Hopatcong. Our address was Andover. I lived in Johnsonburg. So anybody who's from up there who's listening will know. And it's a pretty rural area. Like we didn't have our own post office in the township I lived in. So it was Stanhope. It's a next new, close by town. I hadn't really thought about, this is an interesting question because I've never really thought about how that might have impacted everything. And I am, by the way, the firstborn, which, and I was named after my father, whom you, unfortunately, we're not on video, but the painting behind me, that's my dad. That's and he was an amazing human being, really amazing. And the thing with how we grew up is it's kind of like related to him. I had two younger sisters. One of them died, and one is somewhere in Oklahoma. And my father he was like a really dominant personality, and my mom was 21 years younger than he was. Her
Wow.
brothers tried to kill him
Wow.
before
Okay.
they finally eloped. So, but I didn't know that story till much later. But he was just so much older, you know. But my father he was he was perfect Gemini. He and my mother were both Geminis, and just changeable and free, and hard to pin down, and Daddy did an interesting thing. He did a lot of things, but mainly he ran restaurants, or he had hot dog stands, which were buildings with seats inside and a counter outside, that were called Carl's Hot Dogs. And there were two of those when I was growing up. And I didn't work in the first one because I was too young. And I was born, by the way, in 1950. So I'm 73. People sometimes wonder that. So I thought I'd mention it because I don't mind being 73. I'm going to be 74 in June. Oh my God. But I'll tell you what, 70 was horrible. But the more I get into the decade, the more comfortable I am with it. It's very interesting. Although I'm doing a lot of things and they're working. So that's like huge too, right? Because
Yeah.
when I was 70, my husband, I think he had just died. He had lung cancer for 4.5 years. And so anyway, let's go back to my father because he was so cool. When he wasn't running a restaurant or a tavern, he was a merchant marine. And so he was an engineer on ships, and he would sail to South America and Europe. And there were times when I was a kid when he was gone for 2 or 3 months at a time. And here's my poor mother, when you look at it, she was like 20 and he was 41, right? So he was 42 and she was 21, and he would just go out to sea, and he was all excited about it, because it was, I get
Yeah.
to go to this place. And my mother told me one time she heard him telling one of his friends, and she just started crying, because it didn't bother her, or didn't bother him, but it
Yeah.
did bother my mother to be left all alone. But
Yeah. Well, and
fortunately,
that was also an era where it was just expected he could go do what he wanted. And, that was, it was all about his career and his, being the breadwinner and all of that, right? And she would
exactly.
come to take care of the kids. So it was just assumed, right?
Yes. Yeah. And she wanted to do that. My mom was like super intelligent, but and later on, when we got a little bit older, like I think I was about 13, when she got tired of waiting for him. So she started going to school, and she had never gotten a degree. So she went part-time to a local college, and she got her undergraduate degree. And over the years, she got at least one master's degree, might have been two, I can't remember. Plus she got a job, she was teaching school. So she ended up being, fine. But life was just always better when my father was home,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. So it sounds
and
like two strong personalities for your parents. How did then that shape you as being firstborn, and what was the age difference between you and your siblings?
18 months, Kathy was 18 months younger.
Ah, so pretty close in
Um,
age.
yeah, and poor Kathy, they made, my mother has, filled me in on, she's since died, but some of this stuff is sad. They made a decision when Kathy was born that to prevent jealousy between us, my father would pay closer attention to me, and my mother would pay closer attention to Kathy, to my sister. And, but the problem was my father was this extraordinary, dynamic, strong individual. And he had basically no respect for education. He'd gone through, I think, the ninth grade, because see, he was born in 1907. So everything was different back then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And even he became an engineer because in World War II, they really needed engineers. So they waived all of the educational requirements and just sent him to school for 6 months, a maritime school in Connecticut, which is where he was raised.
Yeah.
Uh, but the thing with my dad is, I don't know, it's like my cousin Patsy used to say when we would visit, she said, when your father came in, the lights went on. He had this magic, amazing personality. And he sang and he played many instruments by ear, didn't read music and didn't care. And he had a beautiful voice. So most of my musical ability came from him. My mom had a beautiful voice too, but had never been trained. And so she had trouble singing on key. And then, but one time I remember, I'm probably going to go all over the place with this if that's all right. You could just stop me. But one time she decided she wanted to be in a play, and it was a musical. It was a local musical at a local theater. And she had to sing, oh, what was it? All that glitters is not gold. And my father he sat at the piano and coached her for literally months. And she on the stage, and I was a teenager, I remember being so proud of her because I don't think she missed a note. And
Ah,
it was amazing,
yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, they were both pretty strong people.
Strong
But
personalities.
yeah, strong. But my father more so. So I guess I was lucky he was my role model, which
Yeah.
is what they had set up. And my mother, in his opinion, he didn't value too much that she did, the education and the teaching. And she was always reading. She loved to read and she wrote poetry, and he didn't value any of those things.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wow.
and
Okay. Well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. Um, would you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert?
I am totally an introvert. And because I've been tested, at some of my corporate jobs, they test for that.
Yep.
Yeah, but
Mhm.
what my understanding of it is, introverts, it doesn't mean how you behave. It means how you're most comfortable, right? So
Yeah.
after I took a test that I was an introvert, and I think my dad was a severe introvert because he was always, life of the party and singing, blah, blah, blah. But he also drank a lot. And he was kind of a happy drunk most of the time. I mean, he wasn't a drunk most of the time, but he, I thought I shouldn't have said that, but that's okay. Anyway, I forgot where I was going. I just
Okay.
distracted myself. I'm sorry. Oh, introvert. Wait,
Yeah.
let me tell you. So how I figured out what that was about is I took a test, and everybody in the class, there was a job, was shocked that I was like lowest on the introvert scale or high on the introverted scale. And then I was going to college. I always did what my mother did. I went to college part-time. Um, and I was in a class, and I always sat in the front. And I'm always first one to raise my hand, who has this? I can do it, straight A's everywhere. But after I learned I was an introvert, I deliberately sat in the back of the class and said, don't raise your hand. And
Hmm.
it was so much easier. Oh my God. Because it always made me nervous,
Yeah.
raise my hand and then I get like, oh my God. Uh,
So you just
there.
had this perception of what you should be doing in
Yeah.
classrooms was to sit in the front and how to behave and everything. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's another element of introvert extrovert, isn't that? That is, where do you get your energy? So you mentioned, about what makes you more comfortable. Where you get your energy a lot of times is within as an introvert, and it's
other from outside with other people. And so yeah, and I could see what I found too is that there can be a lot of performers who are introverts. So when they're on stage, they're bigger than life, right? But
Right.
that's not how what you know, and they get some energy from that, but then they totally need to be by themselves to recharge the batteries. And
Right.
sounds like maybe that was
Perfectly.
your dad and possibly you as well. So
Yes, that's
oh,
absolutely perfectly said. And even today, now that I'm okay with this now because I understand it, I will spend 2 whole days and not see another human being, and I'm so happy, you know?
yeah, yep,
And
yep.
then,
That's so.
yeah,
Another one of my fun questions that I like to get to the bottom of is you mentioned your dad was the life of the party, but on the fun meter, where do you put yourself in terms of a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being a couch potato and 5 being the life of the party? Where do you put yourself?
I'm a 5.
You're
I
5. So
can't
when you
help it.
do go to parties, you like to be the life of the party.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, do I like to? I am. It
Oh,
just
it
happens.
just happens.
Yeah,
Okay.
because
Very
that's how, I don't know, I was kind of trained, I think, by him to do that. That's how
That's how
he
you show up. Yeah.
yeah, and
Okay.
he'd walk into a party and everybody go, "Carl's here." I mean, it was just great. And you are absolutely right too about performing. Performing is great because I would rather perform for 500 or 1,000 people, which I have done. I get on that stage and I am so comfortable and so at ease, and I start singing and I talk and whatever. I would much rather do that than have a one-on-one small talk conversation at a party. Yeah.
Interesting. That is so cool. Thank you for sharing that because I we think performers are a certain way and that they should
Mm.
behave a certain way because how they are on stage is how they're going to be behind stage. And many times they're probably not, right? It's
Not
very
at
tough.
all.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so risk taking. On the risk meter scale of 1 to 5, 1 being a low risk taker, 5 being a high risk taker, where do you put yourself in risk taking?
I'll give myself another 5 because I am some of the it's hard to even explain. I just kind of step up and I had a lengthy business career and somebody one time, one of the big companies, Nestle, I think it was, I was an expert in coupon scanning when it first came out, the barcodes that are that was my whole career was about that business. Um, anyway, I'm pretty sure it was Nestle. They wanted a video to explain to their people internally how coupon scanning worked. I had no idea how to do that whatsoever. And I said, "Oh, sure, we can do that."
And then you just figured it out and you figured it out.
And I figured it out, and it was good. It came out really well. But what I did do is I figured out to talk to people who knew what they were doing
Yeah. Yep.
in that
You didn't have to do
arena.
it yourself. You had to find the people that knew what they were
Yes,
doing. Because
right.
you knew
And
your
I
thing and they knew their thing, which was the video, right?
Yes, the video, and then I had somebody else write the script. Script was a little, I'm a very casual person, and so the script was a little tight for me, but it definitely helped. And then I was the star, that's me.
And then you got to perform again.
That's right. That's what, see, in my business career, I spent most of my time doing speeches, well, although I love speaking, I absolutely love it. I had a guy one time, an AV guy. He had been doing audiovisual work at big hotels for his whole career. And he's told me that, and he said, "I've never in my life seen anyone as comfortable with a microphone as you are."
Ah,
I thought,
that's a
what a
compliment.
compliment.
That is quite the compliment.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, Carlene, let's talk a little bit about where you are today, and then we'll get into how did I get here? So explain, if you would, what it's like to be a singer and a songwriter and an author. What's like your normal day-to-day life?
Oh, there's no, that I'm glad
There
you
isn't.
said that last one. Because there is nothing normal, absolutely nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to say because what I'm working on now is doing a lot of promoting. I first of all, I love writing. I love writing music and books. I love writing. Um, but there comes a point at which you've got to get your stuff out there. If no one's going to read it or hear it, it's not worth anything. And not money wise, but I think my stories and songs are significant. They touch people's hearts, and they soften viewpoints and calm people. My voice does that too, which is that I'm really lucky. I'm, a combination of my mother and father's voices probably. But yeah, so but most of the time lately I'm doing administrative stuff,
Ah,
or I have to go into the studio sometimes to record my last song, and then I have to figure out, well, who else do I want playing on the recording? You have to do, when you're on your own like this, but I'm sure everybody does it. I mean, you pick up your guitar, you write a song, figure out the words, right? Or I do the words first usually, or a combination. And then the next step is to get it recorded and figure out how I want it recorded. I have a recording guy, Stuart Shelton, who is really good to work with. He's also a fabulous piano player. So if I need piano added, that's part of his deal, part of the price. But yeah, you are asking very interesting questions that are making my mind fly around. So a typical day, I try and get in some exercise, and I'll spend quite a bit of time at my computer, but it's all totally different. But what I love the most is being totally alone. I'm really happy, and I'm in Florida now, by the way. I had lived all over the country, but then I met my husband, probably 35 years ago, on a plane where I was trying to move to Costa Rica, and he lived in Costa Rica. And I thought, wow, this is fabulous. But I was living in Chicago at the time, so that's all different. But I'm not answering your original question. Sorry.
well, I just love that you share that there is no normal day.
There's no normal day.
And that you shared a little bit about what the creative process is about. Like you don't think about that as a that musicians, you have to think about, well, how do I get my stuff out there? Where do I record? Who do I want to bring in? Who do I want to partner with? I mean, those are all, decisions. It's just like when you're an entrepreneur, the same kind of thing happens, right? Some people work better in teams, and some people work better by themselves. And
True.
what do we need to create here? So fascinating. So I'm going to take you back to junior high school. What did you want to be when you grew up? And maybe musician was always part of that, but you knew you had to get maybe a real job first or whatever. So what was the thought process as a young person? What do you want to be?
Actually, I want to clarify or add one thing to my father's personality, which is he never played for money.
Oh, okay,
That was
interesting. Yeah.
fascinating. I got the distinct impression, because he would go out with his buddies and he would take my sister and I with him. And when we were 5 years old, we'd be standing on a piano doing little duets as he played in taverns, right? And but he only did it because he liked entertaining people. There is an aspect of entertaining that you're making people happy, so it makes you feel really good. But it never, ever in a million years occurred to me to sing for money.
That is so interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
I just loved it. I loved it. And I started when I was about 11, and I just sing for the family a little bit. And then I got involved with Bob Dylan's music and loved Bob Dylan. And Joan Baez sang a lot of Dylan. So then I ended up patterning my voice after Baez's, but I didn't do anything but, sing at parties in backyards and, kind of sing along stuff.
Yeah.
Or
So it was a passion, but it wasn't going to be your career.
it wouldn't have occurred to me in a million years.
Oh, so what did you want to do as a career then? What was exciting you on that side?
I was going to be a doctor. I was always going to be a doctor, and I wanted to work in ghettos in New York City and help poor people. I had these really lofty goals all my whole life. And I recall one time too, I got good input from my parents that really mattered. But my mother, I said to her one time, because I also wanted a pony, and I said,
Of course.
I want a pony. And she said, rather than saying what most moms said back then, when you grow up, you marry a rich man, he'll buy you a pony. My mother said, when you grow up and become a doctor, you can buy yourself a pony.
Oh, love that.
Love
Love
that too,
that.
right?
Yeah.
And then my mom also, high school and junior high, she insisted that I take typing and steno. Back then, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't even
It
know what
was,
that is. That
I
is
know. Let's call it texting. Let's call it texting now.
interesting. Yeah, right, right.
It's his own
Uh,
language, right? It was its own, there was a
oh yeah,
code to
little
it, right?
squiggles
Yeah.
that all meant something, and
Yep.
you'd
Yep.
listen to your boss, and because they were always he's, and we were
Yep.
always she's. And you make these funny, things, but you could read them because you
Yeah.
knew it was like a
Well, you
little.
could read them. Not everyone could read them, but
Correct, right. I remember one of my bosses one time because I couldn't remember something, and I guess I wrote it really long. He's sitting across the desk, and he stood up and looked at. He said, "What the hell is that?" And it was something he said I was trying to spell out phonetically in steno. Um, so anyway, but those two things came in handy later on, and after somewhere in my, I don't know, after I quit school, I was in my early 20s when I realized I really had an aversion to blood.
oh,
And
that could hinder a medical career.
I had to take one of my neighbors to the hospital. She bashed her head on her cabinet and was bleeding profusely. And I took her I put a bandage on her, got to the emergency room, and then I passed out on the floor. And the doctor said, "Get her out of here." So I was good until, you know, as long as I was needed, I could do it. But then I just said, I don't want to do that. And by that time I had already quit college anyway, after Woodstock, which was that was an incredible turning point in my life.
So you went to Woodstock.
I went to Woodstock in '69, and
Wow.
yeah, the nice thing about Woodstock is, first of all, I did have a guitar up there, and so I did some singing, but again, around campfires and stuff like that. But Woodstock was, I don't know, I was going to the College of St. Elizabeth's, and I had finished 1 year, and then my friend Katie said, there's some kind of rock festival going on up in upstate New York, which was only like a 2-hour drive for us, so it was close. And so we made up a story that Katie's aunt and uncle owned a motel, and that's where we were going to stay. And and the whole Woodstock story, I actually do a show about Woodstock. That's a 2-hour historical, done with PowerPoints and illustrated with the music that was played there, which I sing live.
Oh,
And
wow.
that is really cool. And I also do, your listeners could be interested in this, a show called Judy, Joni, and Joan. And that's Judy Collins, Joni Mitchell, and Joan Baez. And the same thing, PowerPoint, historical, each woman, because they've all influenced my singing a lot and my writing. But it's on my YouTube channel. So if anybody, it's almost a 2-hour video, but if you want to pop in and take a look at the Judy, Joni, and Joan show, and then pretty soon I'm going to be doing a Woodstock Memories show in a couple of weeks. And so I will have that up there.
Wow.
Well,
Very fun.
it's really fun. Yeah.
So you go to Woodstock, you experience this, iconic event, right? And then you come back to college and then you decide college isn't for you, medical school because of the blood thing. So what did you decide to do at that point?
At that point, I got a little tired of my mother saying, as long as I'm paying for your college, you're going to do.
You're going to do what
You're going to follow my rules. I finally said, fine, don't pay for my college. I don't care. So I quit and became a secretary because she had insisted that I take steno or
Ah,
typing.
you had something to
Right?
fall back on. Now, were you living at
Exactly.
home at this time too, or were you living in a dorm or?
I was living in a dorm. My mother wanted me to have that experience. I was only like an hour. She really did she was a good woman. I was only an hour from where I lived, but she wanted me to live in the dorm, and it was a great experience. I met some really nice people there, and but in any case, yeah, so then I quit and I got out. I got a roommate and got a job for a company that was working with barcodes on supermarket products. And I was hired on the day. There were actually 11 different barcodes. Some of them were round, some were a half, because when the industry was trying to decide what kind of barcode, they had the concept, they just didn't. And I was hired on the day that they selected the one that they use today. And that veered me so far away from Woodstock, and I hardly even sang for probably 20 years.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
so you get this job and then you're just fascinated with the product and working in a business environment and a company. I mean, it just kind of lit you up. Is that what you would say happened?
it did. It was really interesting. And I worked with really nice people. And yeah, so I stayed, and then I decided I wasn't happy being a secretary, but where I worked, that was not, and being anything else wasn't an option at that time. So this would be 73 or so. And women were just barely starting to get anywhere in business. So went to, I contacted our top competitors to the company that I worked for that made the other barcodes,
Yeah.
and three of them offered me jobs. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, so the one that I
And
took,
jobs that weren't a secretary, were these like
that's
product
right,
jobs, or
that's right,
marketing, or what would you
training.
say?
I
Training.
started off
Oh,
doing training and writing manuals because I could write. And yeah, so, and then I just went, but I did, it's somehow related to something you said earlier. Um, I did some real, I want to say gutsy moves, you
I
know?
was just going to say that's a pretty gutsy move to reach out
Yeah,
to those three and to position yourself. I don't want to be considered at this level. This is what I can do. I mean, that you really put yourself out there.
right. And they knew me. See, that was the thing. I was bringing them coffee in the meetings, but
Ah,
they would talk to me, and I mean, I think it was pretty obvious that I'm pretty, I don't want to say I'm not like super intelligent, but street smart and pretty savvy in terms of just understanding things. And so I ended up spending probably 30 years. I ended up I moved all over the country, for different jobs, went to Philadelphia, then ended up moving to Minneapolis, which I loved Minneapolis. Ah, what a beautiful place. Um, and then San Francisco for a year, and then Chicago. And then I met my husband. Oh, and then I was going to move to Costa Rica. That was gutsy too, because
yeah.
I, I
With
started
the company, or to just
I had my own company that I was just starting. The job as a vice president in Chicago, I just didn't like it. I don't really like structure. I think that's another good thing for creatives to not have. Um, but it was just frustrating, and I just said, I decided I will be a consultant to the industry, or I'll bartend, but I will not come back to the corporate environment. And that was it.
those
I
were
was
your two
gone.
options:
Yeah, that was
consultant
it.
or bartender.
I liked bartending. I used to do it when I was in college. So not was in college after, anyway, somewhere in the younger days. But what happened was one of our clients said, "Can you leave tomorrow? Because I need you to do some work." So I started, and then I just took the leap and said, okay, fine, I'm an independent consultant, and quit. And anyway, became really successful and started conferences and a newsletter. Um, and then I met and then I started a second, like a branch in Costa Rica, just because I liked it so much down there. But I met my husband on a plane. He ran Chiquita's operations in Central America. And I thought, wow, she's great, because he lives in Costa Rica, right? He hated Costa Rica. So from the very beginning, the things that we wanted never really jived. And I went along with things that I probably shouldn't have. But he didn't like Chicago. I loved Chicago. I was so happy in Chicago. But he wanted to move to Naples, Florida. His mother was here and she had cancer and she was dying. So I got to know her for a year, which was great down here. And also he liked that he was a money guy, my husband. So he looked at my business and went, oh my God, you can be making a lot more money. You, Carlene, who's doing all the work, can be making a lot more money. So he got my rates raised, just established different things. And ended up managing the money, which now I am very grateful for, because since he died, I'm not certainly not wealthy, but I'm okay. I'm comfortable. I don't have to be afraid about money.
Yeah.
And that I totally owe to him. I'd be on a beach in Costa Rica, singing to people or something if it weren't for that. But that took 35 years out of my life too. Well, no, that was the time with him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so after a while, I don't know, I just somehow, we both decided we didn't need to do the business anymore. He got into real estate and I wrote a book. And so that
What was your first book?
the first book was, I had actually written a business book, but I don't take too much joy in that. But the first book, well, this is kind of a story though. See, all my stuff is long. I don't want to take up too much time. Um, I I realized that even before we got rid of the business, I needed to do something to make my life feel meaningful, and it wasn't.
Hmm.
I made money, we spent money, and there wasn't anything in my life that I loved. And so I was going to a meditation class, and the people there said, well, you sing and you play the guitar and you like children. I never had any, but I like other people's children. Why don't you go find a place to sing to children? And there's a place called Immokalee that's about 45 minutes northeast of where I live. That's an agriculture town. And here, because I know this was one of your questions, one of my big philosophies in life is to watch for signs and follow them. And so here these people in the evening are telling me, go find a place to sing the little kids. Very next morning, Naples Daily News had a picture of a group of children from the Guadalupe Family Center in Immokalee.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I
Watch for
picked up,
signs, and there's a pretty
oh,
big.
there was, I know, no, and it happens all the time. I mean, really, you just have to keep your eyes open. Um, and I called immediately, because you also that's the other part of my philosophy. You have to do things. You know
You
what
have
I
to
mean?
act. Yeah.
I,
Uh-huh. Mhm.
I called out there, and the woman who was running the place said, we have everything we need here except music. When can you start? And I just, okay, that's a God sign if I ever heard of one. So I would go every Wednesday and, take half a day, and it's about a 45-minute drive, and I loved it. And then I started singing at the Catholic Church there, and I still do. And then that's what the book was. And oh, it's a longer story, the problem with the book. I went back to college. I had finished my degree in business, which I didn't even like, but years before this. But I decided to go back and finish a degree I had started in medieval history, a master's degree, when I was in Chicago. I went over to Florida International University in Miami, and they encouraged me to interview the people in this town of Immokalee, because, I got to tell you this really quick story. I get to my first class. It's a research class, right, over at FIU. And the professor says, we don't know how this happened, but it was a medieval history class, but it's been changed to a Latin American history class. Immokalee is filled with Latin American people, Mexicans, Haitians, Guatemalans. So I raised my hand. I said, well, could I do a paper about the church in this, little town? And I ended up doing my whole thesis about Immokalee and the histories It was so interesting. They would tell me stories that then I was studying the political and social histories of their countries. So I could say, oh, they thought that was some rich American. It turned out it was a Peace Corps guy who went to their little village, but they remembered him, right? They said
Oh yeah.
this rich white man came and he said there was a place in the United States called Immokalee, which was in the name of my home for the Seminole Indians who lived there. So anyway, that's once I got the master's done, my husband said, why don't you turn that into a book? Because a lot of people, it would be good for people to hear the stories of these immigrants. And they're some of them are heartbreaking, women coming through the desert for days and days with little children and people drowning in the river. And so anyway, I did make it a user-friendly book because my husband said, why don't you just make believe somebody just said to you, tell us about Immokalee. Tell us about the people out there. So I voiced it like a
Like
conversation.
that versus the thesis is more academic, right? And yeah,
Exactly.
you would
Yeah.
write it a certain way. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And then I
Wow.
wrote another book about a priest out there because everybody kept talking about him, Father Richard Sanders. And then, and I needed this. I mean, I'm coming to a conclusion here at some point. I get excited about this though, the friend of mine read Immokalee's Fields of Hope, which was the first book. She's a documentary maker. She said, we have to have a documentary for this. So she said, but we're going to need music. And I said, oh, I can't write music. I don't know how to write music.
What? You hadn't written any at that point?
No, I was clueless. I spent 3 months listening to to see what music we could borrow to put in the documentary. And one day I sat down at the piano and I just started plinking around. And somehow it's a beautiful song. It's called Take These Hands. And I'm still so proud of it. I mean, I still think I've written about 100 songs, maybe. That one that's a heart toucher. And that's why, so lately I've been focused, and that was how I fortunately was put in touch with you, focused on getting my music out there so it can do its job and touch hearts. That's where we are.
That's your whole purpose. Wow. Well,
Yeah.
we've come so far, and I know there's way more stories that you could bring to us, but we probably do need to start wrapping up. But I have all these questions, but this happens in all my interviews, by the way. I
Does
always
it?
get to this point. I'm like, oh, I could ask this and that, and I could keep going, but we do have to have an end at some point, and I feel like this is a good pausing point, and I love that. Touch hearts. So, Carlene, tell us, when you look back now on your life and your career, what do you think served you best? It can be a characteristic or a discipline or a strength or a habit. What do you think served you best?
Trying to think of you may have to edit this out, ballsiness. What's a different word for that I could
No,
use?
I love it. I love my
Really?
last interview had a quote about balls too. And so, I'm not editing it. We're going to keep it. We're keeping it.
Okay. But that is, yeah, I mean, I'll just step up and go, yeah, all right, I can do it. I'm there.
So that 5 on the risk meter is probably more like a 10, it sounds like.
It's pretty, yeah, I'm pretty
Yeah.
gutsy.
Because when I think about, you were it sounds like, so on the forefront in business world in the 70s as a woman, and starting out at that secretary, and then I'm not going to stay here. And then you talk about just casually, oh, and then I was a vice president, but I didn't really want to stay in that role. And then I start my own consulting company. I mean, again, for the time frame that I know you were in, that's very ballsy. So
Oh, thank you.
I applaud you. Okay, so second wrap-up question then. Any words of wisdom that impacted you maybe when you were in a place of transition, or maybe you weren't quite sure what you were going to do next? It sounds like you've had some of those kind of reinventions and things, and you're a big sign watcher, but any words of wisdom that really impacted you that you would share?
I would make one suggestion, and this is coming a little bit out of nowhere. I used to bodybuild. And I was one of the first women in Chicago to be riding her own motorcycle too. So I was
So
just
back
like,
to
I
the
love doing
ballsy. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
it.
And risk
So
taker.
yeah, but Arnold Schwarzenegger did a documentary not long ago, and it's called Arnold, and I would recommend that everybody watch it because his whole thing is be useful, but figure out where you're going and how to be the absolute best you can be at it. And he goes through, it's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I think my own philosophy, the words, watch for signs. Oh, and do what comes easy. And that's a little different, but you know what was easy for me? Singing guitar, playing guitar with those little kids, because I could, it was easy. I didn't decide to play the cello in a symphony. I don't
Yeah.
know how to do that, right? So I
Yeah.
think, and it's easy for me to write. It's easy for me to write songs now that I know how. So sometimes you have to go and, study things and learn things. But just following signs for me I don't know if it's God or the universe. I mean, I'm sure I believe in God. I just don't believe in all the structure. Although I'm a Catholic, and I don't want to offend any of my Catholic friends. And I love singing at mass. So but that's also easy, because that's
Ah,
what I do, right? And it's rewarding. And yeah, watch for
love
signs
that.
and it comes easy.
It do. It comes easy. Well, and when I think about I'm going to go to medical school. So you had this vision of what you wanted to be, right? And then there's a big sign there when you passed out.
Yeah,
That's a sign, right? Let's pay attention to that. That I'm not going to be
that's right.
very
That's right.
useful in this field if I'm on the floor. So, well, Carly, it has been a delight to get to meet you. And each time you just keep throwing these little nuggets at me. Again, I have all these questions, but it has been a total delight. I'm going to have to go out to your website. So, listeners, if you enjoyed today's interview, please subscribe below and you'll be alerted when other interviews are published. This particular interview, well, actually, all my interviews are published on my website, lifestorycurator.com. So I'll post this interview and then I'll post also Carlene's website and social media and other ways that people can follow you and get to know your work and go and check out all of this great stuff that you mentioned today. So on that note, I'll say stay safe, stay happy, and let's keep sharing those stories. Have a great day.
Thank you, you too. Bye.